Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shanta. Today we are taking you to Brazil, and my husband Gurudutt is going to do the presentation. And take it over, Gurudutt.
Hello, everyone. I don't think I've met many of you, but as Shanta said, I'm Gurudutt. I'm generally known as Shanta's husband. So this is a trip we made in two trips actually. Amazon River, Rio de Janeiro, and Iguazu Falls. It's part of two trips. The first trip was in 2016. We took a boat to all the way from Miami to Manaus. We'll talk a lot about Manaus, which is the heart of Amazonia or Amazon jungle, if you will. And I will not talk about many of these Caribbean islands. These are pretty common. The only one place that's missing from here is the Devil's Island, which is part of the French Guiana. So I'll only talk about from here onwards the Santarem, or there's a place called Macapa here where we entered the Amazon River and all our experiences within these parts. The second trip was in 2018, actually, that we took from Cape Town to all the way to ended in. Actually, it was a reverse of reverse of what you see here. I didn't get the exact map of the trip we made in 2018. It started in Cape Town, went to Namibia here, and from there it directly went to Buenos Aires, Montevideo. Then it ended in Rio de Janeiro. Again, I will not talk about any of these places because our focus is only on Brazil. So we'll talk more about Sao Paulo, Santos, and the Rio de Janeiro, and the Iguazu Falls, which is interior. Before we go into jump into show the pictures and so on, maybe a brief bit of background as to the history and the geography and so on. The Americas, both North and South America, if you know, were unknown to much of the world until about 14th, 15th century maybe. But the earliest explorers, there's a lot of exploration, there's a lot of literature on European exploration because the other societies also did a lot of exploration, like our own society in India did a lot of exploration in Southeast Asia based on what you see, our cultural influences in Singapore, Malaya, including even Indonesia and so on. But there's not much research on that, unfortunately. So we did a lot about European exploration. European exploration started essentially sometime around 13th and 14th centuries after the Black Plague. Pretty much Black Plague pretty much devastated European continent, particularly Western Europe, where 1 in 3 died essentially. And the explorers before that were the Vikings. Vikings, one wouldn't call them explorers. They were essentially marauders and plunderers. They originated mainly in Iceland, Denmark, and Norway, and partly Sweden as well. They even reached Newfoundland as the recent excavations indicate. They reached until the islands of Madeira, Cape Verde, and so on around 10th century. Before that, the existence of the North American and South American continents was unknown to Europeans. This is the earliest known map used by Portuguese. Portuguese were the early explorers, if you will, sailors essentially. Sometime in early 16th century, late 1500s. It was Portuguese map, but smuggled out of Portugal, and is still the original still exists in Italy in one of the museums just south of Milan, one small town museum. As you can see, they show the Brazilian coast. They also show this Hispaniola, or what is the present day Cuba and the Bahamas, those islands. You can see them in part of North America as well. This map was drawn sometime around 15th century. um, the interest in exploration, everyone knew India existed by land route because Marco Polo had passed through India before on his way to China in 13th century. And they were all curious about or wanting to find the sea route because of the spice trade. There was intense competition among the Spanish, Portuguese at that time to discover the sea route to India for a spice trade. And the early explorers who made the name there are Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Pedro Cabral. We all know this guy is very much known than the rest of the people. He somehow bumbled into or stumbled into Bahamas, what is today's Bahamas, current day Bahamas, and saw people there and called them Indians, and the rest is history. Why that name stuck, Indians. Vasco da Gama was the first European sailor, if you will, to reach India. And Pedro Cabral was the first European sailor to land in South America, in Brazil. It was present day Brazil. So Vasco da Gama, the blue line. The blue line shows the route taken by Vasco da Gama in getting to Calicut, the city where I was born, actually, much later though. And the red line is the route taken by Pedro Cabral, who landed in what is the present day Porto Seguro in Brazil. The interesting thing is the intense competition for having discovered the sea route developed as to who will explore which parts between Spanish and the Portuguese. At that time, the Pope was the Italian Pope, who had a little bit of soft corner for Spain because Columbus was already Spanish, Italian actually. So he was from Genoa, although he was commissioned by Queen Isabella of Spain to do the exploration. So he called a meeting of the King of Portugal and Queen Isabella of Spain, and they struck out a deal between three of them how to divide the world. What he did was he wanted to divide the line between Cape Verde Islands, which were by then Portuguese colony or claimed by Portuguese, to draw a straight line on the Cape Verde Islands, and whatever is west of that line would be left to Spanish. Whatever is east would be left to the Portuguese. That was Pope's agreement, the treaty they signed. What they didn't realize at that time is the thing called Mercator mapping process. The mapping and cartography was not that well developed. If you put the map flat on the flat surface, anything north of the closer to equator looks very big. Like Greenland looks much bigger than it is. Canada looks much bigger than the United States, and so on. So if you put that on a globe, actually the line passes through Brazil. So Portugal claimed that, yeah, this part is ours. We will explore that. So they essentially ignored that treaty. A little bit of statistics about Brazil. Landmass-wise, Brazil is a very large country geographically. I mean, it's slightly smaller than United States, but it's one of the very large countries geographically in terms of 8.5 to 8.5 kilometers, square kilometers. I could add possibly Buenos Aires, Argentina or China to that as well, because Argentina is around 5 million square kilometers, and China is about 4.6 million square kilometers, and so on. But the population-wise, they're very close to, they're 212 million people with 25 people per square mile, whereas compared to ours, which is four people per square mile. Of course, much of our land in Canada is frozen north, but nonetheless, that shows you sheer size. The economy, Brazil is about $3.2 trillion and compared to $19.39 trillion. The reason I'm showing this is all these three countries, geographically, area-wise, natural resources, everything, and unexplored territories in those days, if you will, is very similar. Brazil is very rich in mineral resources, forestry, fishing, wildlife, and everything. Same as and United States is. But the life in these three countries is very, very different, as you will shortly see. And, uh, and there are sociological and anthropological reasons for it, and there's a different topic of discussion altogether. One of the indicators is the GDP. If you take, Brazil is 15,000 US dollars per year, which is a middle income country essentially. I mean, with this level of income, most countries can have a very good standard of life. Most of European countries or many countries in the world have this level of standard of living. But the quality of life in Brazil is miserable, as you'll soon see. The reason for this is called Gini index. Gini index tells how the wealth and the income are spread between the populations. Walter Gini was an Italian statistician who came up with that ranking, and which is widely used today by economists and the social policy makers around the world. Gini index of 0 indicates everybody has exactly same income and wealth. Everybody's numbers are exactly same, which is impossible. Same way, Gini index of 1 indicates extreme inequality. Only one person has all the wealth and the income, rest is nothing. You'll see we rank 117th from the top. 157 is the best. 117. United States comes way below us, and Brazil is even much lower than that at 0.4, 19th rank out of 157. The Scandinavian countries like Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, they rank very high among countries. Now, Gini index by itself doesn't tell much of the story because very, very poor countries like Mali, Chad, Niger, all these they rank very well in Gini index, but they're extremely poor quality of life. That is determined by the Human Development Index. This is United Nations measurement. It basically measures the overall quality of life, like access to healthcare, education, living standards, and so on. Okay. So in overall terms, if you see, Brazil is a very unequal society. On to Amazonia. This entire area, lightly colored area, is the Amazon river basin, if you will. The river itself starts in a place called Maranon. It's called Maranon Peruvian Amazon. Somewhere the river starts from here. Until a place called Iquitos in Peru, it's called Maranon, and from then on it assumes the name of Amazon. See, this strip in these parts of the world, there are no major historical sites or monuments to see, or it's more of a sociological and ecological experience. The sociology, how different things are from what we are generally used to, and ecological and so on. Now, there's a debate among geographers and even countries who are interested countries, which is the longest river. Amazon is claimed to be the longest river, but Egyptians say Nile is the longest river, and Chinese say Yangtze is the longest river. Now, it depends upon where you measure the river from. Now, although we may say it originates here, this is exactly where is here. Is it here or 10 miles before, 10 miles after? What defines a river really, and so on. So nonetheless, it's one of the longest rivers in the world, and but it's definitely largest by drainage area, discharge rate, and number of tributaries. There are well over 1,100 tributaries. There are about well over 1,100 tributaries, which feed into the river, and there is at least about 17 of them are more than 1,500 kilometers long. As you can see, the number of rivers that goes into it, and so on. And this entire basin, Amazon basin, is the world's largest um, ecological home to uh, varied species like pink river dolphins, harpy eagles, last home for refuge for jaguars, spider monkeys, poison dart frogs, and at least about 40,000 different plant species. It's a very unusual location in the world, unspoiled location, because there was no agriculture in this area, formal agriculture in this area until the Europeans arrived. The people who lived there, the Aborigines, mainly lived by subsistence, hunting and fishing. And the formal cultivation of crops started only when Europeans came in further. This is the area where we enter the river itself. Place is called Macapa. Two things hit you right away. First thing is the smell of smoke and the haze. As we are reading everywhere, the Amazon is being burnt and cleared by interested parties or disinterested parties, so whatever you want to call them. And we're losing large amount of forests in those parts. Thus, you smell that smoke right here, at this point onwards. The mouth of the river is extremely wide, as you see in the map. The second thing you notice is the color of the river. See this color, dark brown, muddy color, and this is black, almost black. The reason for that is this river is called Rio Negro, joins the Amazon rivers somewhere, and the Rio Negro comes from the Colombian Andes, and this river, Amazon itself, originates in the Peruvian Andes, as we saw. This is basically with minerals, and this is essentially mud and sediments and so on. And interestingly enough, for about 1,200 kilometers, these two waters don't mix at all. They run in parallel, right from where these rivers come together until they reach the ocean. Now, these two rivers come together in Manaus, which we'll see shortly. Now, much of the Amazonia, there are no roads. There are practically no roads, none at all, period. Amazon is the highway, the only access to interior, unless you fly into Manaus. The only other way to get to Manaus is by flight. So everything is transported on the river, all the goods and everything that comes is river transport. As you pass through the river itself, you see lot of villages, like subsistence farming or subsistence fishing. As I said, there's unequal society and a lot of poverty in the countryside. They took us to show us one of the villages, which is called Boca de Velarias village, typical village. Again, only way to get to that place is by boat. And maybe I don't know what's the population of this village, I don't remember. But typical village has a meeting place like this, and then there's of course the church, and then there's a school, and all the houses are built on stilts because of Amazon floods during the rainy season, which I think lasts from October to March, and the water rises about 8 to 10 feet high, and so so you see so there are umpteen number of villages. Most people who live in these parts have very difficult life, if you will, and most of them have never traveled outside those villages because the only transportation is, as I said, there is a river. Manaus is the town. We start in here, we enter the Amazon River at this Macapa, at this place, and we sail all the way to Manaus. We stopped in a couple of other places called Santarem and so on, nothing much to see there, but Manaus is the major town, which is the gateway to Amazonia. It's a city of about 2.2 million, which is significant for the interior of a country like that, which is surrounded by thick jungles. It's a sizable city. Toronto itself is 2.7 million if you exclude suburbs like Mississauga, Richmond Hill, and so on. That gives you an idea as to how large the city is. It was known as the rubber capital of late 19th century. Charles Goodyear in the United States came with the process of vulcanization. He invented the process of what is called as a vulcanization of rubber, natural rubber. Natural rubber is very soft and not very elastic at all. So he came up with by adding some sulfur compounds to that. It becomes malleable and it can be very used and all. And rubber became extremely popular item, much like what plastic is these days in late 19th century. And the only place at that time rubber was grown was in Brazil, particularly in and around Manaus. So Manaus became extremely rich. The another interesting tidbit there is Henry Ford, who invented the 4T model, which made the success of mass production, set up a town called Fordlandia just to cultivate rubber, if you will, in these parts. It was an experiment that went very badly. Then we go further, sail into Manaus. This says welcome to Manaus in Portuguese. Incidentally, Brazil is the largest Portuguese-speaking country. It's not the Portugal. and the Brazilian Portuguese is, of course, I'm told, is quite different than standard Portuguese, as it happens in most of the New World. They had Manaus had in those days, in the late 19th century, an opera house, as well as the first philharmonic in the entire South American continent. And in 2014, they also built a very huge stadium to host the FIFA. Guess what are these things? These are school boats, or school buses. They go along the river to all those small villages we saw, pick up the high school, only for high school, pick up students and bring them. The boat ride can be as much as 2 hours each way in many instances. And most of them come to Manaus or other major towns in the area like Santarem and so on. This is a gas station, this floating gas station. It goes from place to place and you just flag it and apparently it comes close to you, then you can gas up your boat. It's another gas station, also a kind of a convenience store. They took us on an excursion to see the jungles, if you will, which was a bit of a disappointment because whatever is close to the river banks is highly much of the jungle has been torn down and to make it a farmland or ranches and so on. So there is not much of a jungle close to the river itself, unless one travels very deep inside. Now, this is typical landscape which we walked into. The guide showed us the survival techniques in jungle, how to start a fire, how to find fresh water. There are a bunch of trees which you chop down. You can have drinking water because much of the water what you find there is not potable and it's not safe to drink water you find in the jungle, either the river water or the well or pond water, if you will. So this is how to set up a trap to kill snakes, essentially, snakes and rodents. So this is about the jungle life. And then we saw about 2 or 3 different species of animals. This is the first one. This is called caiman, C-A-I-M-A-N. This is one of the species of alligators. They're not very big alligators. They grow about 3 to 4 feet in length and as much as maybe 100 pounds at the most. But they are like any other alligators. They subsist mainly on fish and also small mammals like who go into the water like deer and even dogs occasionally. But humans they keep away. So then they sent a couple of people from our boat they caught them, brought them, and gave us this experience of holding on to them. They, and it looks very, actually the skin is quite dry. The scale is very thick scale, and the mouth was tied with a plastic rubber band so that they won't snap at us. This is the same one. Now this one is a big one. See, mouth is tied up here. So after we,
this one was very heavy. I could hold it for only a few minutes, and then I said, please, somebody take your turn. Because it was, even though he was holding in one side, I was holding the tail end. It was very, very heavy.
So anyway, after the show and tell was over, they took off all the things they put on their mouth and let them go into the water. They swam off happily, hopefully. And this is another of the sights we saw. That this is a fish called arapaya. They call it arapaima. Arapaima it's called. It's one of the largest river fishes anywhere in the world. The normal fish can grow as heavy as 200 kilograms and as big as about 6 feet in length. The flesh is very edible, very tasty actually. The chef of the boat we were on, he would go to the marketplace every major port we entered and we'll get the fish. So he bought one. He brought it on the boat and grilled it right in front of us, and we all lined up and took a piece of it. It's very quite tasty fish. Unfortunately, like most of the things that are good on the earth, we tend to destroy. Like this is also nearing extinction, just as those caimans as well. But what's the advantage here is that I believe this species is now available in other freshwater rivers as well, rest of the world. The another thing we noticed was what is called as a piranha fish. Now it looks pretty harmless, about 6 inches in length, tiny fish, most like many edible fishes. But this one is a very vicious animal. Now this fish has extremely sharp teeth, and they are carnivore fish, if you will. They survive only on eating flesh. If you let a school of piranha can consume a full-size goat in a matter of 10 minutes. The only thing that will be left will be the bones, bare bones. But they don't attack on it unless there's some wound on it, so they can smell blood. So anybody in the earlier days, this is a very big killer for people who used to travel along the Amazon. Now everyone is very cautious about it. They tell us. They gave us an experience of trying to fish for it. Many passengers caught the fish. We didn't catch any. This is the fish, as you can see. It is very sharp teeth here. And this bird is macaw. It's a very typical Amazonian bird. It's a very big bird. It's about 2 feet, almost 30, 40 pounds it weighs, and a very loud bird as well. So after this excursion, we sailed into a town called Parentinas. Now, Brazilians are very fond of. I did talk about Brazilian demographics before we jumped into this. But Brazil is essentially was populated by Portuguese, but Brazil brought probably largest number of slaves from Africa because of their African colonies between the 300 years until late 1500s to 1850s, when finally slavery was ended. Out of roughly about 12 to 13 million transatlantic slave trade, I believe Brazil imported about 5 million slaves. But the difference between North America and South America was the Portuguese government actively encouraged the Portuguese immigrants who were very reluctant to go to Portugal because they didn't find it very friendly in terms of geography to intermarry. So much of the population, the bulk of the population in Brazil is a mixture of the native indigenous people and the African slaves and their descendants and the Portuguese. They are called Pardo. The name they call is Pardo, P-A-R-D-O, which I believe in Spanish means brown. And they make up about 50% of the population. And the Caucasians, mainly from Portugal initially, later on from Germany, even Britain, if you will, Italy, and so on. They make up about 30% of the population. The remainder is made up of natives, indigenous people, and also Asian. Like outside Japan, Brazil is the largest Japanese population anywhere in the world. Something like 3 to 4 million Japanese people. So, and the indigenous people were at one time numbered, estimated something like 30 million. Today are less than 300,000 people. There are tribes and indigenous people tribe who live in remote Amazons who don't want contact with outside world, and they still keep to themselves essentially. Now, this is a festival based on the indigenous beliefs, if you will. They call it La Bomba. What is it called?
Bomba.
Yeah, Bomba Mibo. Bomba Mibo, the name. It talks about the folklore of the indigenous people, like anywhere else, devils and evil creatures, and how we humans we conquer or overcome those things and so on. Now, this festival is the biggest one outside with Rio's Rio Carnival, that happens in February, and this takes place in June. This is held in this town of Penintinas. It's a very spectacular dance and costumes and so on. Mind you, the place at that time, most of the time, this is a very warm tropical country. Temperature any given time is 30 degrees plus, with almost 90% humidity. You sweat like anything. And in that type of weather, the costumes they wear, which are very elaborate, as you can see, all the setup is very extremely elaborate, is very, very creditable, remarkable. These are all the native dances. This is the indigenous, that king who conquers over,
The chief of
the chief who conquers over all those evil creatures, and and you know who these two are. All right. Now, from here on, we sailed on to Santos. Santos is a port town for Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo is the largest city in Brazil. We didn't go to Sao Paulo proper because it's more of a commercial capital, the financial capital of Brazil. It's inside. It's about 60 miles from the coast, and the coastal port, or the port city, is the Santos. So we go to Santos. Santos is very famous for Pele. I don't know how many of you remember the name Pele. Pele was one of the greatest football players, football or soccer, if you will. His real name was Edson Arantes Nascimento. I don't know how, nobody knows why that name Pele stuck. Maybe as a kid he was called Pele and the nickname stuck. He was born there in 1940. He was the FIFA, the Football Association. They claim that that he's one of the greatest football player ever so far. He played 4 World Cups, 1958 to 1970, and won 3 of those. So this is the stadium where he played. I remember in my childhood, reading about Pele and in local newspaper in Gokarn, the Kannada newspaper. I clearly remember that is seeing his pictures and so on. So
first time he played.
yeah, this is a stadium, this is a football club, the Santos Football Club. This is where he played for the longest, actually, first time and later on as well. So this is, and we went to a few other places, like there was the botanical gardens, and like botanical gardens are the same everywhere. And so I won't show those, I won't go into those pictures. There are museums as well. And Sao Paulo, as I said, we didn't go there, and because it's about 60 miles, and it's just a city. And, then from here we sail into Rio de Janeiro. Now, Rio is the coastal city which used to be capital of Brazil and the first major port where most of the European migrants landed in 16th to 19th century. Now, there are three major sites in Rio. Rio is known for a lot of things, but the important sites are, one is called the Christ Redeemer. I don't know if every one of you can see the cursor. It's right here. I'll show you close-up pictures later on. So Christ Redeemer is one, and the Sugarloaf Mountain is the another one you see here. And there is what is called as a Copacabana beach, which is on the outside on this area. There are several other beaches, a lot of beaches, 8 or 9 different beaches. Copacabana, then there's Ipanema beach right here in this area, other side of this mountain. And if you are Stan Getz fans, they would have heard that song "Girl from Ipanema." That's about that. It was composed by Astrid Gilbert and her husband. So that made that beach very famous, if you will. Then there is a lagoon here. It's called Fritas, De Fritas Lagoon. Lagoon is it's connected to the ocean, but it's a very large inland lake-like thing, which provides a lot of picnic areas and parks surrounding and so on. One thing that strikes you in Rio is the sheer spectacular settings, the water, the mountains, the hills, the landscape, the greenery, the beaches, which the closest that comes to my mind is Sydney, Australia. Although Sydney is not green like this, it's more like a desert thing. It's very dry. But the sheer beauty of it, of the surroundings. Wherever you go, you see water, you see these mountains, hills, and so on. There are about 8 or 9 different beaches. This is Guanabara Bay. It's called. It's a very big bay, Atlantic Ocean's Bay. It goes all the way up to about 200 miles interior. There is another town, other side of the bay, which is connected by bridge to Rio, but it's quite a distance away. So much of the population lives within Rio itself. Rio is also known for another major site, which we didn't go and nobody wanted us to go, favelas. The closest that come to our imagination is Dharavi in Mumbai. Brazil, as I said, very unequal society, and close to it, it's claimed that it's said that roughly 20% of the population lives in those favelas, and every major city, Sao Paulo, Santarém, or this one, Rio, they all have, or Brasilia is their capital. They all have those favelas, which are very densely clamped shacks, if you will, shanty towns. Okay, now to Rio itself proper. As we enter the Rio, port of Rio, you get very spectacular sights of like this. These are what they call as a Barnhart rocks. These are monolithic granite rocks, which is about as much as they rise, just like icebergs. There is another equal amount or even slightly less than equal underneath, so that they stand upright. You find plenty of them. You find them in South America and also in South Africa or Southern Africa, more than South Africa. So you see so many of this as you enter the port. Now, as you enter the port, you see that Christ the Redeemer statue as well from a distance. This is the central business district. Now, the Christ the Redeemer statue, although is a very spectacular sight, unfortunately, it's I would say it's very small and very cramped area. It's on a height of about 2,400 feet, a steep mountain, and to go there, either you have to take a trolley car or a walk or climb the rock, if you will. You can go do it either way. But there is not much room to stand there at all. Then the only best picture we could take was these ones. This is only about where the statue itself is. There's no more than 5 feet kind of a causeway around it. That's all the space you have, and it's so crowded. You have to elbow people to even take this picture. So now this statue itself was built around 1920s. It's made of concrete and soapstone. Much of the face and all those things is made of soapstone, hands and all that. There's a concrete, reinforced concrete frame inside this, built around 1920s, and it's about 98 feet in height or 100 feet in height, and about 92 feet arms, both arms spread. This is a sight you see from practically everywhere in Rio, wherever you go. This is one of the pictures we took from that particular height, if you will, from the near the Christ the Redeemer statue. You can see the Sugarloaf Mountain. I have better pictures of Sugarloaf Mountains than this, which we'll see. And that this is the Copacabana beach. And we stayed in a hotel right here next to the beach somewhere. The Ipanema beach is around this area, and this is that lagoon I talked about earlier. Another picture from the same. This is the lagoon. This is as we come down or go up on the trolley car. This is that lagoon again. Next, we go to the Sugarloaf Mountain. Now, Sugarloaf Mountain is another very spectacular sight. You have to take a gondola or gondola. It's a two-step gondola. There's a in-between stop, like this is the first stop. We are on the ground level right here where I took this picture from. This is the first stop is right here. Then once you reach that first stop, from here you take, this is the first stop, and from you take another trolley car to go to the actual Sugarloaf Mountain top, right here. It's another view of that. And even the ride itself is extremely spectacular, what you see on both sides of the windows. Now, this is a sheer monolithic. Monolithic means it's not made up of multiple stones. It's one granite block, if you will, egg-shaped. Now, they call it Sugarloaf because the first agriculture, the first farming that was done by the settlers there, the colonizers there, was growing sugarcane. And to grow the sugarcane, they imported the slaves. And the sugar in those days, they didn't know the art of really making the crystals like what we see today. So they used to make into loaves like this. They used to recast the liquid sugar into loaves. And so that's how the shape of that sugar loaf. So they saw this, they started calling it Sugarloaf Mountain. That's how the name came up. The mountain itself rises about 1,300 feet above the sea level. And geologists estimate that roughly around another 500 to 600 feet is below the sea level, under the ground, if you will. Now, here you probably can see some faint figures right here on the cursor, and also here. These are all the rock climbers, the really adventurous ones. See here, you see a whole lot of people trying to climb the rocks there. This is another view coming from that gondola. Again, that De Freitas lagoon is here. Then I think this is the Ipanema beach. This is a wealthy enclave. As I said, there's a very extreme differences between income, and there's extremely wealthy, extremely poor. This is a very wealthy area, very gated community, and so on. Now, this is Copacabana beach. Yeah, the beach is very crowded during the day. I don't have the picture with the full, actually. Beach itself is very crowded during the day. You find a lot of people sunbathing and so on. But the picture is very different at night. Totally deserted. Rio has one of the highest, for the size of the city, one of the highest crime rates, murder rates, and so on. So the people say it's very unsafe, and we never ventured out after it was dark. So people don't go out much after dark. And you see their military police or the police on a jeep with the mounted guns, mounted machine guns, patrolling the area, and great amount of crime. Um, So these are essentially the sites in Rio, but still, nonetheless, the overall experience of visiting Rio is very good, and the sheer um, natural beauty of that city and the arts and culture and the food. Essentially, if you're a good if you're a meat eater, probably one of the best steaks you find is in Brazil in the Rio restaurants. We did try that, and yes, I agree that it's one of the yeah. Okay. From here we flew into Iguazu, which is roughly Iguazu Falls, which is about an hour and a half flight from Rio. We had to fly into Iguazu township itself. Now this is a stock picture. I did not take this. It's available, publicly available stock picture. Just to give you an idea of the sheer size of the waterfall. It's a huge waterfall. There are roughly about 275 plus waterfalls, big and small. And this is where the Parana River joins the Iguazu River, and it empties into Rio Plata River near Buenos Aires. From here, the river flows into Atlantic Ocean near Buenos Aires. The country of Paraguay is just up the north from here, right around here. Now, this is Brazil, this is Argentina. The Argentinian side, this island belongs to Brazil, and the Argentinian side, the view is much better. Like we have Canadian Niagara Falls, a much better view. So we have to cross into Argentina to see this, which was you can drive through it essentially. As you can see, it's extremely spectacular waterfall. See this walkway? I'll show you where the walkway is. This is the walkway. This is where that picture was taken, this walkway. There's another walkway right here, which is on the Argentinian side. And there are a lot of trails between these waterfalls. If you are young and adventurous and you have enough time, you can explore all those walkways. And everywhere you go, you end up into another waterfall, small to big. The another thing you'll notice there is you have to stand still, and a swarm of butterflies descend on you. Yeah, but there's so many butterflies. You simply stand still and they come and sit on your shoulder, on your face, on your nose, and no two butterflies are alike. See the designs. This very, very different from each other. Now, this is one of the life's one-time experience in life. There is one of the big waterfalls. Now, behind this waterfall, there is a cavern, if you will. They make you sit in a zodiac, and you have to wear bathing suit, and they take you right under this waterfall inside that cavern. And by the time you get there, you're totally drenched. They give you rubber bags to protect all your the camera and stuff, but you get totally wet. It's a rubber zodiac, and this is zodiac. This is before we go in. That's why we are not yet wet, totally wet. But that's a spectacular experience, if you will. Scary, of course, it's scary because you hear simply the roar sound of that waterfall and the sheer amount of water that falls on you. Now, I have three or four videos And with those videos, I think we come to the end of the uh, presentation. Same one?
Same one. This one is on Brazil side. This one.
My finger is coming in between.
The best part of this forest is around that you see all greenery. There are no buildings, no, it's not commercialized at all, like Niagara Falls.
Oh, same one.
Done.
There's one more. Yeah,
Done.
yes. This is the last one.
So we have the next all the way walking.
That concludes the presentation.